So, as I was saying today, I'd like to talk a little bit about applications. I wanted to do this in the context of an article that I wrote on Friday about an idiosyncratic view of the origins and future of capital. So there, I try to do a thumbnail sketch of capital as a coordination technology. So again, the article that I wrote is really just a thumbnail sketch, right? It would have to be dramatically expanded to really make the case, making a whole lot of claims that I hope are largely common sense, or or people can judge for themselves rather quickly whether or not they have any veracity. And then I'm stitching them together. So the essence is that there has been along with the digitization of a lot of other things, we've digitized capital. But the original implementation of capital, the sort of industrial, physical implementation of capital, had a lot of assumptions in the system that were that created inequities, and that was sort of okay, because the physical apparatus moved at a relatively slow pace, right? The physical transference of gold or even paper money is relatively slow, and because it's relatively slow, there are trends that are implied by the rules of exchange, and those trends unfold at a particular pace in the physical implementation of money, and so that gives time for course correction. So when people see trends at a global level that are not ideal, they can correct, right? And so there's enough time for society to have a debate about whether these trends are in fact not so good, or whether they're desirable, and then do a course correction. When we shifted to a digitized version, so electronic transfers, electronic banking, electronic shopping, and attendant high-speed distribution, electronic delivery in many cases of services. All of these things resulted in a great acceleration of the transactions. And because of these great accelerations, the trends that were implicit in the rules of exchange were dramatically accelerated. And so all of the assumptions that essentially lead inexorably to these inequities were dramatically accelerated. And whether or not you believe this argument, what you can do is, it's a matter of public record that in the last, say, 30 years, the rich got richer faster. It's not just that the rich got richer, but the rich got richer faster. The gap between the 0.01% and the rest of the populace greatly expanded. And it's so bad now. There's a wonderful video that talks about it when people are asked to draw the what they think the wealth distribution is, and then they're confronted by the actual wealth distribution. The gap, but the wealth distribution gap is so far off that the you can compare it in terms of the deltas that they think it is those deltas are even bigger than the deltas they think there are. I haven't said that very clearly, but it's quite astonishing how big the gaps are and how far off people are from in terms of their perceptions versus the reality. So it's really worth going and taking a look at the data, because even if you don't believe the arguments about how the data got to be that way, at least you can see that it is the case that the rate of disparity has dramatically accelerated, and it matches the digitization of the economy. Let me just stop there and see if all of that argumentation makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right, so the next piece of the puzzle is that if we're looking at capital as a coordination technology, then if the coordination technology shuts down the total number of coordination models, then it ceases to be coordination amplification, right? So the point is that Homo sapiens superpower is coordinating, and capital is one of the tools that they've invented to amplify that superpower. However, if the different ways that they can coordinate themselves gets shut down, then the tool stops being an amplifier and starts being a dampener. And again, that's an objective fact, right? It's like if Homo sapiens' major advantage is they can invent these different coordination models, and capital helps them with the invention and implementation of the coordination models, then if over time capital shuts down either the inventiveness or the implementation of a range of those coordination models, then the tool has ceased to serve its function. So go ahead.
Are you thinking about that most of this capital is not on the level of to be usable? It's more like just to be by, for itself, right? Not to help in coordination.
What I'm saying is, if it gets to a place where capital is not helping with the coordination and is actually shutting down a wide range of coordination models, then it's no longer amplifying this superpower. That's all I'm saying. No judgments, no politics, no blame or shame. Just literally checking to see if it's continuing to serve its function to amplify this superpower. And I think what we can see now is not only has the gap between the haves and the have-nots dramatically expanded, but the ability to redistribute the capital so that you could explore other models that involve different distributions has also dramatically diminished. Right, so it's not just that capital is stuck in the hands of a few, but there's an inertia with respect to this particular distribution. It's hard to get away from this distribution. So essentially, what we can say then is that this particular implementation or iteration of capital as a software system is broken. It just broke, right? We tried it out. We ran the program, and after a certain number of runs, the program ended in a place where capital stopped doing what it was supposed to do. So that's the basic argument. And again, you have to take as an assumption, or you have to take on faith that capital is a tool for amplifying our coordination superpower. If you don't believe that, if you think it is the role or purpose of capital is something else, then this argument doesn't work. But if you buy that argument, then then it's clear. It's an objective assessment that sort of digital capital 1.0 is broken. So then the next question is, what do you do in if you were going to improve and make a digital capital 2.0, then what are some of the guidelines? Well, again, the part of the argument is that you want to make you want to continue to maintain the number of coordination models. So you want to amplify coordination. So the first observation is that programmability is the essence of amplifying coordination. When that's why we invent programming languages, right? Is because with a language and with programmability, you can dramatically increase the number of models you can explore. Right, that's sort of the whole point of programmability. So programmable digital currency puts capital back on track in terms of its function to amplify our coordination superpower. So that makes to me, I feel like that's a fairly straightforward argument, and I think anyone who's a developer would agree with me. But let me just check in and see if that makes sense to folks.
Yeah, this makes sense to me.
Cool.
I mean, all these big companies, they are using a capital for coordination.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And people talk about this, right? Tax incentives are implicit in tax incentives is that we're using economics to incentivize behavior. Likewise, protest shopping or socially conscious shopping, those are all obvious nods to capital as a means of coordinating human behavior. And programmability of digital capital, I think, is an obvious step towards increasing our ability to coordinate. Now, the other point is that you could still have centralized capital and programmable centralized capital. But my argument is, and it would be, it's a little bit too long to get into this argument, but my argument is that if the means of the production of capital is centralized and the means of enforcing the distribution rules is centralized, then those very centralizing assumptions, built-in assumptions, they create the inequities. And so, you know, in fact, if you do an analysis, there is always a pull towards a state where the rich get rich faster. And you know, you can use von Neumann game theory to make these kinds of arguments, but I'm not going to do a bunch of arguments in terms of Nash equilibria. Instead, I'm just going to, you know, appeal to your common sense that whenever essentially what happens is the rich begin to influence the means of production and the rules for distribution. And this is exactly what's happened in the U.S. Legal system, right? Corporate interests have gotten their fingers into Congress, and that changes the rules for distribution, right? So, so in general, whenever you have the ability for the rich to get to the rules for distribution, then the rich get richer faster. Unless there are some, and unless there's some balancing forces that balance that out. These are, and you know, these are, you know, exceptionally powerful pulls. So if you think of the space of all coordination models, then the schemes where the rich get richer faster are gravitational wells, and when you're when you have a centralized means of production and enforcement of the distribution rules, then you have then they're supermassive black holes. It's really, really hard to get away from their gravitational pull. So if we want to sort of provide some sort of level playing field, then decentralizing the means of producing capital and the rules for enforcing them is a really important step. So, and this is where, you know, blockchain comes into play. Because what blockchain platforms do is they provide programmable digital capital and a decentralized programmable digital capital. That's essentially one of the first things that people noticed about blockchains. Now, obviously, with our chain, we go beyond that, right? Because we're recognizing it as a coordination capability, and we see data as even more coordinating than capital, we focus on the data side. That's an area where we could explore, but I want to take it in a slightly different direction. So, you know, if people listening to the Casper Standup want to read the article, it's up on Medium, and we can post a link to it when we post this Casper Standup. But I want to consider an application. And this is something I want to give credit where credit is due. My sister observed that why don't we simply use economic incentives to support COVID reducing behavior? So you don't really say what the behavior is. You don't say how to reduce the behavior. You simply incentivize behavior that is in fact COVID death or COVID case reducing behavior. So tax breaks or cities and states that are able to turn their COVID situation around. is an example of the kind of thing that she was thinking about. Does that make sense? Do people understand her proposal?
Yes, yes, makes sense.
Cool.
Well,
So go ahead.
yeah, the best way to eliminate the COVID is to shut down everyone in their flats. So this is the best way.
Sure.
I'm not sure how you balance stuff.
Yeah, I understand, but you know, mask wearing, hand washing, a variety of very simple behaviors that have been contact tracing. All of these things are simple, effective procedures that have been employed in various regions, such as New Zealand, with remarkable effectiveness. Right? I mean, the deaths per capita in New Zealand or South Korea are far below the deaths per capita in the U.S. Right, so we know that we've got a handful of behaviors that we could incentivize that would give dramatically improved outcomes. But we don't have to say what those. We don't have to dictate what the behaviors are. We simply make it results based. We say, if your city turns COVID around, then the city gets, federal funds, either in the form of tax breaks or direct federal aid. Right. That's really the one way to do this. You don't tell people how to do it. You simply say, if you achieve this outcome, then you'll get money. That's the idea. Now, the interesting thing is, I think my sister's idea is absolutely worth exploring, and worth exploring right away. Now, let's consider how you would have to explore it in the case of the US. So legislation would have to be introduced, because we're talking about federal funds. Legislation would have to be introduced as a bill to the floor in Congress. So just the introduction of such a bill would take weeks, right? And like for my sister, even with her dramatically improved ability to communicate to many people, right? So she can post her idea on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and everywhere, right? But the possibility that it gets to someone who would write legislation, a bill, right, and put it to the floor of Congress is still incredibly slim, right? Even if she was focused and wrote every day to her representatives and other representatives, it would take quite a bit of effort for her to get to the place where that bill could be introduced to the floor of Congress. Then they have to debate the bill, then they have to pass the bill, then they have to go to the Senate, and then they have to implement, they have to roll out this thing. So we're literally talking 6 months at the speediest to get such a program in place. And if you think about it, right, if you compare the relief bills for the U.S. citizens, that gives us a time horizon that we can measure the accuracy of these estimates against. So we're certainly within a margin of error in terms of this kind of time estimate. Hopefully you get my drift and you understand my point, that in order to use the existing infrastructure, legislative and coordination infrastructure, the governance side of coordination, it would be so slow that at the current rate of death, assuming that we don't have massive spikes, we just cap it off right where it is, we'd see, potentially another 100,000 Americans dead before you would get these incentives in place. So that's a pretty high price to pay for that speed of coordination. So now let's consider an alternative. Today, my sister, Maura, uses our chain and mints a token, which she can do, as was demonstrated at the AGM, with virtually a single button click. So in the space of a few minutes, she's minted a token. Let's call this the COVID-19 relief token. All right, and she works both sides of this market. So she proposes everywhere, Instagram, everywhere. She announces the existence of this token, and to the cities, she's and in fact even to individuals, she's saying you can get supplies of these tokens if you have demonstrated proof of bringing your numbers down over this period of time. And this is where you need to post your evidence, right? So she gives them a place on the blockchain to post the evidence of turning their numbers around. And then on the other side, she goes to athletes, pop stars, merchants, you name it, and suggests that they are willing to give certain benefits in exchange for these tokens. So Taylor Swift is willing to give autographed CDs. The LeBron James is willing to give autographed T-shirts. You get the point, right? Merchants are willing to give discounts, or in fact, even groceries for these kinds of tokens. So the point I'm trying to make is that she could be going directly into action right now. And every step in this process could be done asynchronously. So once she mints the token, if someone here says, hey, that's a great idea, I'm going to work this with you, then they can coordinate together to work both sides of this market. And nothing is stopping them from pursuing this proposal vigorously. So let me stop there and check and see if everyone grasps what I'm talking about.
I'm also wondering if how to have some kind of trust, or to show that someone is really understanding why this is useful, and how this can be used. Because someone else can get to idea to do this just for their own benefit, or.
Oh, of course. I mean, that's in some sense, that's kind of the whole point, right? What you want to do is you want to align self-interest with societal interest, right? We want people to pursue their self-interest, and what will happen is that will be course corrected if it moves too far off of societal interest. So in the case of this token, a city or an individual who might benefit from the receipt of these tokens, the first thing you have to do is you have to monitor that their behavior actually resulted in the reduction of COVID cases or deaths, right? So we're keeping fairly rigorous track of the COVID cases and COVID deaths. And as a result, we can measure for a given geographic region what the COVID case count is and what the COVID death rate is, right? So that part we can trust, and also we can insist that the parties that we trust, such as the state coroner, for example, or a city coroner, that their data goes onto the blockchain with the corresponding authorizations, right? So we can use the blockchain to provide and monitor data. So we can check that the data about the rate reductions has authority and weight and veracity, right? So we can use the blockchain for that side, right? And it's also quite easy to check. So, for example, let's say that some rapper initially agrees to provide some merchandise for the tokens. If they then don't provide them, right? Then again, the fact that that's happened can be crowdsourced and checked, right? So we can make it as a part of the whole process that when you receive your merchandise or your benefit, that again, that's recorded to the blockchain. So you can check that that side of the system is not being gamed either. In general, the blockchain offers a blockchain that allows to take in data such as photographic records, audio records, and other kinds of things for the completion of transactions. Physical transactions is going to be far superior in the ability to verify that transactions that are that don't involve just digital goods and services have completed. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right.
Especially like when we can collect data on the blockchain, even it doesn't have to be connected directly in this moment to some action, but later all of this data can be used for some greater idea.
Exactly, and you can link it with existing verity checks, right? So FedEx, for example, when they deliver a package, they take a photograph, right? So you have tracking number to photograph, and all of that can be linked into a blockchain record. So if merch is sent with regard to the package, then there has to in order to receive the token, or in order for the person who has received the token to be able to send it on, they have to have provenance, right? So they have to say, okay, well, I received this token in exchange to give this merch, right? In order for them to move it on, they have to show that the merch was actually successfully delivered with a tracking number and a photograph of successful delivery, as an example. So the point I'm trying to make, though, is that this idea, my sister could pursue this idea now, and she could pursue it in an asynchronous fashion, right? So she could, she only has to get one city to start with, and a few merchants and local celebrities. So she's taken the problem from the scale of trying to push through legislation at the federal level down to something that she can work on locally. And if she's able to get other people to observe her success, then they can replicate what she's doing, and they can all coordinate through this model. So
yes, this very much makes sense. I mean, if in some city, if someone is doing something, it's probably it can be used in another city, almost the same.
Exactly. So what this does is,
I mean, another aspect of this is that even at the city level, you really don't need the government to be engaged. All you need is data from the government to monitor. And then the entities that are engaged could be the businesses and the local community, because you could just incentivize them and you say, but the metric is that, say, the coroner is reporting fewer COVID deaths and the hospitals are reporting fewer COVID admissions.
exactly.
And then maybe there is testing, some kind of a tests are reporting fewer COVID transmissions. So this is all data. This has nothing to do with really the legislative structures themselves, because anytime you bring in a legislator or representative democracy, you have rent seeking. And you can avoid that by just decentralizing it all the way down to the individuals and and perhaps just one level above the individuals. So.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And so this is kind of the point I was trying to make about a programmable decentralized capital, but put in terms of stark realities here on the ground. Trying to do this, trying to take these kinds of actions at the federal level through federal legislation at the current rate, which we can all see, right? We have plenty of data in front of us in terms of the various relief packages that were available, that were pushed through Congress. We know the rate at which that happened. We know what's happened with the second relief package and how long that's been debated and what the time horizons are. Right here, we can put together a means of incentivizing behavior with respect to reducing COVID that is entirely self-organized and from the grounds up. This is exactly what it comes down to is there a will, right? And you can measure whether or not there's a will by, well, first there's an education process. People need to be able to see that you could use the tools in this fashion. And then once there is a sort of several demonstrations that you can use the tools in these fashions, then the measure that then how often the tools get used like this is essentially a measure of the will within the community to coordinate themselves. I believe that this is one of the most important applications of capital, and I also believe that as we get closer and closer to the consequences of climate change are going to be as life-threatening as the fires in Australia were last year, then we will see more and more will. I hate to laugh, but if I don't laugh, I'm going to cry. There will be more and more will behind coordinating in a faster manner, right? And that's why this technology becomes so critical at this juncture. So anyway, that's kind of what I wanted to chat about today. Any questions, comments, thoughts?
I mean, I like the idea, and I think you're right that now we see lots of organizations or groups of people who are trying to coordinate, and I see this is not really always very successful. I mean, somehow this coordination part is very difficult, and even if there is a will, I see that organizations fail with some misunderstanding, or someone wants to go in one direction, someone is another. So yeah, some way of what would you say? What is what is really preventing us to use Archon right now? Because basically we have all of the pieces, right? And
nothing is preventing us from using our chain right now. I mean, the biggest thing, of course, is education. Helping people see what they've got. What the situation on the ground right now reminds me of the old story of the heavenly banquet. So I don't know if everyone knows this old story, but it bears repeating. So a man dies and is greeted at the pearly gates by Saint Peter, and Saint Peter says, "Well, you've lived a good life, and you can go wherever you want. You can go to hell or you can go to heaven, whichever place you'd like to go. And the man thinks a bit and he says, well, let me see hell. So Saint Peter claps his hands, and they're standing together in a room in which a sumptuous banquet is prepared, and all the people are seated at the banquet, and they all are so disposed that they can't get up from the banquet, and they have these incredibly long forks, incredibly long utensils, so that they can't get the food to their own mouths. So they're all sitting there sullenly starving. There's this beautiful food in front of them, but they can't get the food to their own mouths. And the man looks at the room for a moment and says, okay, I think I get it. Now let's see heaven. So St. Peter claps his hands again, and they're in exactly the same room, the same setup, with the same long utensils. And everyone is smiling and happy and eating to their heart's content because they're feeding each other.
Yeah, I like this one.
Yeah. So anyway, so yes, we have the tools to coordinate now. we could think of our chain as providing that heavenly banquet, so that if we wish, if the idea occurs, we can feed each other. All right. Any other questions or comments before we sign off? Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity, and we'll have the link for the article out. And if anyone wants to help with a COVID incentivization token, let me know. It's probably worthwhile. The one thing I will say in closing that was kind of interesting to me was, after I explained to my sister how you could use our chain to mint the token immediately, and then that you could work on both sides of the market, the merchants and the states and such, asynchronously. She said, wow, that's amazing. And then she came back and said, and how does blockchain help? So apparently I had done a miserable job of explaining it. But I do think that many people don't understand, what goes into the minting of a particular rewards program. That's actually quite challenging, and that if it's all in the hands of a centralized party, then you have misuse as you have a high rate of misuse in those kinds of situations. All right. Well, I will see some of you in stand-up, and thanks to all, and please stay safe.
You too. Thanks.